Well, it's a good conversation that you're having there, and it's a doozy of a question that you've asked. What do I think when different categories get labelled under the umbrella term of mental health? I think the umbrella term of mental health is a diagnostic bin mental health issues is a diagnostic bin that whenever professionals in the field are under pressure to give a diagnosis and they really don't know what to do, a lot gets tossed in there. And it really has got to the point where it doesn't mean that much. Mental illness doesn't mean that much. Mental health issues doesn't mean that much. There is a lack of nuance in the field. And to your second question, do I think it is ableist? I kind of had to look that one up, I got to be honest with you. I disconnected from a lot of the more politically correct language quite deliberately because I found it was influencing the way I was thinking. So do I think it's ableist for people to feel negatively towards those who demonstrate NPD behaviours? No, I don't think it's ableist, but I suspect that, like Colonel Akbar would say, it's a trap, because there is potentially a political correctness trap here where if we agree that NPD is an official diagnosis and is a personality disorder and a quote-unquote proper mental health issue, then the same as somebody who is, for example, schizophrenic, then how could I or anybody justify feeling negatively towards somebody who's simply sick and couldn't do anything about it? Your question maybe goes deeper than you really realise, and maybe through your extensive experience, unpleasant experience it sounds, disappointing experience, with psychiatrists and with the institution of psychiatry, maybe you've become more educated than you realise, and you're picking at a thread right now that if you keep picking at, I believe you will pull the whole thing down. You'll pull the whole thing apart. You probably already have inside of your own head. You've probably deconstructed this quite well. It doesn't work, is the simple truth. The simple, sad truth is the psychiatric institution is many years out of date. And I am certainly not the first person to say what I'm about to say. Never has anything worked so poorly and done so little good for so long and still continued. Never. I think the first person I heard say that was Richard Bandler, one of the co-founders of NLP. For whatever worth you take that reference, at the very least, he rebelled against the mainstream psychiatric institutions. It works very, very poorly all the time, not just psychiatry. People want to defend and say, oh, psychiatry is terrible because of the medicine, but at least psychotherapy and counselling works. The statistics just don't bear it out. At the moment, if you wiped everybody's memory, or you were an alien that came down from another planet and you looked at the mental health institutions that we have, including psychiatry and counselling and psychotherapy, you would call it a scandal, a farce, and a complete scam, a total scam. People who observably and scientifically, since you brought up the point about psychology, psychiatry and science, people who observably and by the rigors of scientific testing can be proven to be completely ineffective at their jobs and to have no idea what they're doing, and to have been proven through the research sometimes to make their patients worse by re-traumatizing them, are still in operation and still making money from their scam, where they really don't know what they're doing, and we know that they don't know what they're doing, and we know that they're causing more harm than good. The DSM was brought up. I, for the last couple of years, have defended the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual because I found it a useful model for understanding what I find. Other people maybe find it easy who are smarter than me, but I'm not bright that way, in a very dry intellectual way, unfortunately. So I found it very useful as a way of understanding cluster B personality disorders as defined by the American Psychiatry Association. Now, I'm answering your question on a thread, on a page that I found because somebody else posted a picture somewhere else on Facebook, and I've kind of entered a conversation between you, AW, I'll use your initials, and somebody who is a neuroscientist. And the issue of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual and its scientific effectiveness has come up. So let me just bring an element to your conversation, and I am butting in on a conversation, I realise, that hasn't been discussed yet, which is that every mental health disorder that is in that Diagnostic and Statistical Manual is voted for. The existence or non-existence is voted for at a conference attended by psychiatrists, by American psychiatrists, and they say yes it is there, or yes it isn't, or no it isn't. I've just come back from the pub, I think I mentioned that before. So how scientific is that, and to whose tune are they dancing? To the economic and social system that backs these people and that pays their wages? Are we going to deny that there is huge pressure from Big Pharma to keep selling psychiatric drugs? There is a multi-billion-dollar industry across the globe. And there's also huge pressure on them to appease the insurance companies who are also looking to make money from this. So certain diagnoses come in and out of fashion dependent on whether there is a product and a profit behind them. Consequently, narcissistic personality disorder is a kind of a hot potato, a kind of a football that gets kicked back and forth. Nobody really wants to hold it. One of the reasons why is you can't drug it. You can't drug narcissistic personality disorder. There doesn't seem to be much that you can do for any of the cluster B personality disorders as defined in the DSM. Now I say I formally defended it because I formally relied very heavily on it. I no longer do, and this is a recent development for me, this is in the last 3 months, because I actually see it as perpetuating a sickness-inducing myth about how these seeming, let's be careful with language now, these seeming patterns of behaviour play out. Again, I'm not the first person to say this. I am not convinced that narcissistic personality disorder or any of the cluster B personality disorders are a different personality disorder. That's one major point. And secondly, I am not convinced that any of them function as a personality disorder per se, as we understand personality disorders elsewhere. I'm not even convinced that personality disorders exist, because if we want to be really specific and go all the way down the rabbit hole, I'm not convinced that the social structure of what we call personality at all has real scientific merit. I suspect it is a culture-bound syndrome and a culture-bound fantasy that we think we have this thing called a personality, and that if it doesn't function at an individual level in the way that the individuals and the larger society around us want it to function, we call that a personality disorder, which, to use a crude analogy, and again I have to say I'm not that bright at a raw intellectual level, I'm very good at taking complex ideas and making them simple. The model that we seem to be using here is you have a red car and it has an engine, and that red car is supposed to go from A to B, and when the engine breaks down, that's a personality disorder. That sounds ludicrously simplistic. Well, it is ludicrously simplistic, we can all agree that. Then for what reason are we all just talking about this as though it is an actual mechanical fault, when it isn't? It clearly isn't. There is no mechanism called the personality. There is only a linguistic and a structure and social construct called personality, and I'm not convinced anymore that it exists, and I'm not convinced anymore that therefore such a thing as personality disorder, as in a permanent personality disorder, means the 3 P's: permanent, pervasive and personal. I don't see that that's even possible anymore. Because personality to me seems now like fluff. I don't really think people have personalities. I think what they really have, and what we don't like to look at, because we like to think of ourselves as unique and special snowflakes, is what we have is a series of conditioned, in a very Pavlovian, very behavioural, Skinnerian way, conditioned responses that are emotional and physical and psychological, and preferences based on our experiences. And it's really, if we pop the hood of this car and we look at it, we would probably see that we're not unique and special and developed, as unique and special and developed as we would like, and that we're actually quite crudely robotic, and that we're actually quite simplistically animal-like. And that's why we're desperately trying to avoid it, and desperately trying to invest in this fantasy that, oh, I have a personality, and my personality type is XYZ, and your personality type is ABC. And now I would say, no, these don't really exist. But it is financially beneficial for some people to pretend that they exist. Is it ableist then to feel hostility towards somebody who has treated you badly? In my opinion, no, because narcissistic personality disorder is not a personality disorder, because personality doesn't exist. Therefore, NPD as it is described cannot exist. There's no structure that holds NPD in place. Your mechanical, animal-like responses to scenarios can be changed with the right technology. And there's all kinds of ways of doing it. I'm still a big believer in talk therapy if it's done by highly skilled black belts who really, really know what they're doing. I'm still a big believer in simple guided meditation and hypnosis, and some very, very simple cognitive behavioral things that can be done, but they need to be done over time, and they need to be done under certain circumstances. Hypnosis style work, I believe, can make big changes. The use of psychedelics, clearly and observably and scientifically, as has been proven, can make huge changes in people's personality, as can spiritual and religious experiences, and people who believe that they've attained enlightenment or become born again, whether they believe it or. It's not the discussion I want to engage in here. I'm just saying that people can change so thoroughly, so quickly. And quickly in this context might be 2 years or 3 years, but you know, hey psychiatric institution, hey world, you're saying there's a thing called personality that's permanent, pervasive and personal to me, and you're saying there's such a thing called personality disorder that's permanent, pervasive and personal, and I'm saying, no, I don't think so anymore. I really don't think so. I think people are way more fluid than that. More simple and more complex and more interesting and more dull, all at the same time. We are actually far more predictable and actually far more subtle as entities. And it's here's the thing, when you take away context, here's the trick. When you take away context and when you take away society and culture, many things change very quickly, and a lot of the way we see things and a lot of the way we talk about things is rooted in politics, is rooted in the social system that we find ourselves living in, and the economic system that we find ourselves living in. So there are things that we unconsciously know that we cannot think, that we then self-police and do not think. There are things we know that we cannot feel, so we self-police and we do not feel them. And we do not know that we do not feel them. We do not know that they become unknown unknowns, and we make them unknown unknowns, and we'll never find them. So do I think it's ableist? No, I don't think it's ableist. I think it is perfectly acceptable for you to feel hostility towards somebody who's treated you badly. In fact, that would fall within my definition of sanity. If you don't feel hostility towards somebody who has treated you badly, then something has gone wrong. To cover the points more quickly, because there's 2 other points I want to address. I covered the DSM. Psychology and philosophy. Let's remember that psychology is not a science, nor should it pretend to be one. That's a mistake and a dangerous trap that we've fallen into time and again, and caused a huge amount of suffering because of it. Historically, psychology was a branch of philosophy and therefore should still be seen as such. That does not let us off the hook, those of us who would call ourselves psychologists. It doesn't mean that that means, oh, it's just a branch of philosophy, so I could just talk about ideas and I have no responsibility to my client, I have no responsibility to the system that I'm developing or espousing. No, absolutely not. We should be proudly practical philosophers who are getting our hands dirty by applying that philosophy and getting feedback. We should be absolutely adhering as much as is possible to the scientific method. But as important as the scientific method is, we should also be balancing it with critical thinking and trying to be as objective as possible, which is where, you know, if you want to talk critical thinking and trying to be objective, I can only tell you that from my perspective of the counselors and the psychotherapists and the psychiatrists I speak to, we really fall down. We're really letting the ever expanding client base, as people develop more and more mental health issues, I wonder why that is. We're really letting people down by failing to be objective and to actually engage in critical thought and to actually look at and say, hey, what presuppositions am I coming to this client with? I'm so smug and so certain of myself, and I have my list and I have my DSM. What preconceived notions am I personally bringing to this situation? And is this about me being a good psychologist or a good psychiatrist? Or is this about me actually trying to help the client? So there's that issue. I can't remember the last one. Oh yeah. You mentioned a diagnosis of PTSD and then autism and then ADHD and then BPD. You said that PTSD was a non-starter for you because there were no flashbacks. I recommend that you look at something called CPTSD. It is not accepted by mainstream psychology and psychiatry, and probably never will be. There's an excellent book by a gentleman called Pete Walker that you can download on your Kindle app for a couple of dollars immediately. Pete Walker. It's called CPTSD, From Surviving to Thriving. And when people have CPTSD, they are commonly diagnosed with BPD, but it's a false diagnosis. I won't get into the reasons here. I get into the reasons more in my channel, Spartan Life Coach. And also the flashbacks that you're having. Yes, if you had CPTSD, you wouldn't get flashbacks as is defined by PTSD specialists, but you would be getting something that we call emotional flashbacks. The royal we, me, the royal we, as in people who are involved in using CPTSD as a model, call emotional flashbacks. These are invisible flashbacks, if you like. They are only registering at the emotional level. There is no flashing back to a specific singular incident, like that time me and my buddies were blown up in Iraq by an IED, that time that a sniper shot my arm and a piece of it disappeared, or that time that I was in a violent assault, or that time I was in a car crash, or that one time when I got beaten up and I fell on the floor and I could smell lemon-scented bleach. And now whenever I smell lemon-scented bleach, I instantly go into the flashback of being punched and kicked. No, this is an emotional flashback where you simply remember the emotional experience as a child, usually where the trauma was first instilled, but it can be in adolescence or in adulthood, of the emotional feelings that you experienced whilst being abused, a highly potent, overwhelming assortment of emotional feelings you experienced during abuse, and that something, an invisible trigger in the environment that you're going to struggle to define, fires it off, and all of a sudden you say that you're experiencing intense irritation and anger. There are 4 predominant responses in CPTSD: fight, flight, fawn, or freeze. So it sounds like your primary response is fight. You're triggered into wanting to fight back when you experience a threat, or it could just be stress, or it could be somebody who is making you feel the experience the same context as where you felt all of those emotions in the initial trauma. So I don't know, an overly dictatorial ambivalent parent, a tyrannical parent, a narcissistic parent who bears down on you and makes you feel powerless and impotent and unworthy, would send you perhaps into a furious rage, or maybe you developed a sense of righteous indignation as an adult about that scenario. Then anybody who makes you feel trapped or locked or unable to express yourself, or like your desires for who you want to be are not valid, will fire you off into a rage again. This all started because we were on the thread that we were looking at. We were originally talking about oxytocin and testosterone and the pure bullshit that the mainstream media speaks about oxytocin and testosterone. The idea, the deeply sexist idea that testosterone is a male drug. If you feel it, you will become aggressive. If you experience heightened levels of it, you will become aggressive and territorial and primitive caveman. If you're experiencing oxytocin, then you'll just be sliding around on a wave of loving feelings, which we know the science tells us is bullshit. Low testosterone levels are associated with stress. Having very high or very low testosterone is bad. Having high levels of oxytocin, far from being the love drug, can actually become the obsession drug. If you want me to dig it out, I'll find it. There was a paper that somebody sent my way. It's actually a partner that I do speaking psychology seminars with. She sent it over to me. She's a biologist. I am not. And the study showed that heightened levels of oxytocin can actually be present in obsessive stalking type behaviors, because the oxytocin makes you feel a withdrawal, which is like a heroin withdrawal from a drug. It's very, very intense. So oxytocin, far from being this lovey-dovey, everything is warm and glowing thing, can actually switch. If you're very, very attached to someone, which is what the oxytocin is doing, it's making you feel attached to one person, and they pull away, you can be feeling extreme levels of obsessive compulsive thoughts about that person, and it can be extremely stressful and very, very distressing. That's what heartache is. That's where heartbreak comes from. It comes from oxytocin. So it's not, once the science has been filtered through mainstream media and weak journalists who are just looking to sell an article to a magazine that's just looking to make sales to its advertisers, you're getting some pretty crap sense of what's going on. Hormones are extremely important, as anybody watching this video knows, and no hormone has one job. No one hormone. It's not like testosterone, the man hormone, aggression and territorialism, estrogen, the woman hormone, love and nurturing, oxytocin, the love for. It doesn't work. Hormones just don't work like that. It would be nice if they did. You poor neuroscientists and biologists out there, I'm sure you'd have a much easier time in exams if hormones just did one job, but they don't. They combine and they fluctuate and they go up and they go down, and they can cause all kinds of problems. At very high levels of testosterone, it's not good. Very low levels of testosterone, it's not good. If you don't have oxytocin present when you're pair bonding with a partner, you won't really love them. You won't really feel that rush of love and lust for them. Similarly, if you have too much of it, you will become very controlling, or you could potentially become obsessive compulsive and controlling of them, and it will be the very oxytocin that is making you do that. Estrogen levels, estrogen levels can have all kinds of effects physically and psychologically. None of this stuff is good or bad, and none of it is male or female. All of that is nonsense, and not you and I, like society, culture in general, needs to grow out of such silly, reductive, overly simplistic models that are just miles away from science. It's like science says, hey, maybe sometimes, because this is how science works. When you read a science paper, this is the voice should be in a science paper. Hey, maybe sometimes the statistics indicate possibly, unless we fucked up the experimental design, that maybe sometimes in this one particular group of people, it seems possibly that diminished levels of testosterone can be related to depression and stress. But we could be wrong, and we have some ideas for how we would redesign the experiment of the future, so on and so forth. Then a bunch of other academics come along and go, well, you got this wrong, you got this wrong, you got this wrong. We won't publish you in our paper. This is standard scientific procedure, boys and girls, for those of you who never tried to get a paper published. So you go, shit, they won't publish it. And they told me, because I fucked up the experiment here and I didn't cover my arse here, and I'm going to have to go to it. I really want to get published because it's going to further my career. So I'll go to another paper. So they have like a list of papers that they go to, where if you didn't get published in this one, or you have to go back and redo the experiment. You have to actually take on, you're like, I want to be published by these people. You've got to go back and take on their criticisms and go and redo the experiment or parts of the experiment or how you crunch the numbers. Because statistics, you can make them say pretty much whatever you want. So even science isn't scientific. Don't take my word for it. I'm not a crazy conspiracy theorist here. Go and Google science isn't scientific. Go and Google use the search terms, most research papers are wrong. Now everybody in the scientific community will say, I'm giving you statistics from peer-reviewed research. It's the ultimate of the ultimate. Not most, but a lot of it that is published is junk. We know. Because other scientists went along and did a meta-analysis of published papers and they said, hey, when we ran the statistics on this, 20% of them were actually full of shit. Go and do it. Just go and find out for yourselves. I went on a long time there. I hope you found that useful. You know, I don't know much about where you're coming from your individual perspective as somebody who is trans, because I don't know enough about the subject. But I know humans, and I know stress, and I know PTSD, and I know CPTSD, and I know enough about psychiatry and mainstream psychotherapy to be able to back up the statements that I've made in this video. I'm no fan of mainstream psychiatry and mainstream psychotherapy, mainstream psychoanalysis, and I'm no fan of the DSM or their definitions either. The models of the cluster B personality disorders, they're useful, but I now believe that it's quite possible that it's doing more harm than good. So this is science. You run with something for a few years and you go, this is good, this is good, this is good, and then you go, oh shit, okay, that's not good. Science is not religion. It's not like we have the truth and now we stick to it forever. And if we prevaricate from the previous truth, then that means we've lost faith. That means if this was religion, I'd be an apostate to the DSM. No, that's not how science works. You're supposed to drop the model that you were using when you find it doesn't work anymore. I am no longer, let me say this here first, because I've never said it on this channel before. I no longer hold to the idea of narcissistic personality disorder and codependency the way we have been speaking about it till now. I'm not saying emotional abuse doesn't exist. I'm not saying narcissistic patterns of behavior don't play out. Listen to my words very carefully and in a nuanced way. What I'm saying is the way that narcissistic personality disorder is commonly described, I think is flawed in very many critical ways. And our job now is to look at the ways in which it is flawed and to move beyond old patterns of seeing things and defining things, to transcend the old and find that which is new. And through doing that and through rebuilding new models, we'll rebuild new models and they'll be dogmatic and there'll be new dogma, and then we'll have to transcend them eventually as well later. Whew, that was a long one. I hope you guys found that useful. Thanks for your time and your attention, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Cheers.